Within the first hour of the nationwide invasion, beginning on October the 4th at midnight, the various Trojan shock forces within the DFW battle space, in accordance with fourth-generation warfare doctrines, were now rapidly emerging from their various CCP regime properties, which were all strategically purchased and placed as close to the objectives as possible, and were thus able to, in accordance with these doctrines, strike rapidly and avidly against their various given objectives. Objectives including, of course, the key invasion routes, which in this area included I-35W as well as I-35E, as also the additional interstates were considered critical for the occupation to follow the victory over the defending forces, as they would require these as key logistical routes to sustain their forces on land, as it were, with their various trucking capabilities within the logistical forces of the PLA, as well as also additional elements such as paramilitary formations, which would possibly transit through the area as well in the future occupation. For the time being, however, the PLA's 59th Group Army, which was a reserve group army, as well as also the attached 83rd Air Assault Brigade from the active duty 83rd Group Army, which the vast majority of that was fighting in the Houston battle space, were effectively the forces that were attached together for the sole purpose of capturing this specific battle space and all of the given objectives therein, as the 83rd Air Assault Brigade boosted the capabilities of the all-extremely well-equipped Reserve 59th Group Army, as these air assault forces effectively provided the capability to rapidly deploy troops into any given area within the battle space, and to do so in such a manner to where lines of retreat could be cut off, such as was the case at the DFW International Airport, as two entire air assault battalions from the 83rd Air Assault Brigade were deployed to effectively cut off the lines of retreat to the south, as three armored battalions from the 35th Armored Brigade would strike from the east, north, and west respectively, as the air assault forces arrived first, naturally, to cut off the lines of retreat, as these formations, effectively land-based, would drive in hard against their given objectives. As it pertained to the fighting in the downtown areas, which also included the use of these air assault forces, the Air Assault Battalion deployed into Fort Worth and the Air Assault Battalion deployed into Dallas would effectively be utilized to rapidly disrupt any defending forces from being able to construct any type of defenses, such as barricades or sandbag emplacements or more, as the fighting also early on included enormous firepower from the 19th Artillery Brigade and its various battalions of both howitzer and rocket-based artillery, showering the battlefield with enormous quantities of rocket and shell munitions, as this effectively was all ISR directed through the real-time AI battlefield data processing system, which sent down the pre-prepared strike packages. All of the artillery strikes were not only exceedingly heavy, but they were also exceedingly accurate as well, as the ISR network was directly connected to the real-time AI battlefield data processing system, from the quadcopter low-level drones operated at the squad level to the high-altitude recon drones, all the way to satellite, providing a complete three-dimensional real-time overlay of the ever-evolving, fluid, modern battlefield. As all of these capabilities were exceedingly immense, the defending forces, having lost their own ISR capabilities through the tandem anti-sat and cyber strikes, as well as also communications, including redundant communications from the land-based and even aviation-based electronic warfare assets, as the H-6K heavy strategic bomber aircraft, as well as also the JH-7, also known as the Flying Leopards, had the highly advanced, state-of-the-art, state-of-the-industry KG-600 electromagnetic jamming pods equipped on these aircraft, and the ground-based systems operated by the 59th PLA Group Army were much the same, as these would jam radio and also even radar, as in portable radar or multi-mission radars utilized by forces such as air defense forces and others, as this ISR capability of the portable radars would, in effect, be lost as well due to the electromagnetic targeted jamming, being able to isolate the origins of enemy radar and radio signals and thus jam them by directed electromagnetic jamming attacks. As the PLA forces, including the 16th ID in the south, were all now racing for their given objectives, the Armored Battalion on the eastern side of the 16th ID's general positioning throughout the battlefield on their CCP regime properties, as this Armored Battalion was one of two, as the 16th ID was effectively comprised of two different brigades, would be sent to clear the flanks en route to the downtown area. Arriving even before this armored battalion would be a battalion of air assault troops, as they would effectively, in a different manner from the Fort Worth fighting going on concurrently, would be landed in a diamond-like formation within the downtown area, as the first air assault company of the battalion that was attacking the area would be landed via the transport helicopter company, as they, along with the combat aviation company of the Z-10 attack helo gunships, would support the landing operations, as these air assault forces would naturally be clearing a landing zone as they would land their forces, as the use of a diamond-shaped landing in this area had a lot to do with the fact that the 2nd of the 198th, an American Armored Battalion, was present in the downtown area on its eastern side, as well as also in Deep Ellum, as that was immediately adjacent to the east side of the downtown, as these forces would assist directly with the arriving Armored Battalion, which would effectively move into the area after they had landed most of their troops, would assist in combating the American armored forces, as these PLA troops in this image are doing just that, as they would also have heavy support from the CH-901A loitering munitions, which were launched en masse at the battalion level from all of the ground-based combat forces, as the arriving armored battalion's headquarters and support company with their combat drone section would be firing 48 at a time of the CH-901As, which could be equipped with fragmentation, HE, or heat warheads, as the heat warheads were the obvious choice for combating heavy armored vehicles such as main battle tanks and infantry fighting vehicles, as the air assault troops were well endowed with anti-tank weaponry such as the man-portable HJ-08 systems. They would massively complement the arriving armored battalion forces, as they, again, would arrive in the area after the air assault troops had landed most of their ground-based companies, such as their 4 air assault infantry companies and their mortar company for ground-based fire support, as they would be landed, again, in a diamond formation, one company in each area. The last company that would arrive that was ground-based would be the mortar company for fire support, and they would effectively be landed in a freshly cleared downtown Dallas, as again, the air assault infantry would play a massive role in clearing many of the buildings in their given areas as they would be landed. As the layout of downtown Dallas, as it was a well-built-up downtown area with many high-rise buildings and skyscrapers, it would be time-consuming to clear these buildings. However, the air assault forces would manage to pull it off, as their 4 air assault infantry companies, breaking up into different platoons, would be able to go down different streets and clear out these areas, including the buildings themselves, as the mortar troops, again, of the mortar company of the air assault battalion would be the last to be brought in. They would effectively be able to set up their systems without any problems from any defending forces. As in the downtown area, most of the defenders were armed reactionary civilians, and of course the heavily equipped 2nd of the 198th. However, without their ISR capabilities and communications, they were effectively a force that was thrown back into the Stone Age that would have to communicate through hand signals, as in line-of-sight communications or earshot communications, which included even using runners to relay information, as they were at a critical disadvantage in this particular fight. As the different companies comprising the armored battalion that was to move into downtown would be effectively breaking up and moving through different areas of the downtown, 3 of the 6 ground-based companies, as in the 4 tank companies and 2 armored infantry companies, would effectively swing in around the downtown area on its east, while the 3 other companies would move effectively through downtown, as in through their streets, effectively surrounding, unbeknownst to the Americans, the 2nd of the 198th, and a relatively large grouping of armed reactionary civilians, including just over 200 in the Oak Cliff area that were heavily shelled and rocketed by the battalions in this grouping from the 19th Artillery Brigade, which included a PLL 66 battalion of towed howitzers, 152mm, the heaviest artillery of all in this brigade, which was the single battalion of the 300mm rocket systems known as the PHL-03s, as well as also the PLL-01 battalion, as there were 2 battalions of PLL-01s, 2 battalions of PLL-66s, and of course they were present, these additional battalions of the PLL-01s and PLL-66s, with both battalions of the 122mm Type 83 multiple launch rocket systems, which comprised these 2 additional battalions, as these multiple launch rocket systems were effectively in the PHL-81 family, but the Type 83s were an upgrade on this platform, and these were highly capable and very destructive systems as well. However, the grouping of battalions, the PLL-66 PHL-03 and the PLL-01 battalion, again, would be heavily hitting the downtown area, although the major portions of downtown themselves would be meticulously spared of immense destruction. Areas on the outskirts of downtown were effectively free fire zones and were able to be razed to the ground, such as the far east of the downtown of Dallas and Deep Ellum, as well as other areas to the north, such as Uptown, as it was actually called that, and even areas to the west and south of downtown, as all of the artillery was, again, ISR directed through the real-time AI battlefield data processing system. The PLL-66 battalion and the PLL-01 battalion of 155mm towed howitzers firing into this area, of course being joined by the PHL-03 battalion, would again be firing with immense accuracy, but also cause immense destruction wherein their munitions would land. As again, the utmost effort would be taken to preserve the downtown area of Dallas for the most part, although again, on its fringes, there would be massive destruction. Even the PLA Strategic Missile Forces brigades that were across the border in Mexico, and also one as a Trojan unit, the 616th, as the 612th and 613th, were bolstered by additional called-up reserve battalions to enable them to fire more systems in a single time. All of these different systems would be pummeling their targets that were acquired through the cyber intelligence and analyzed by the AI, creating these targeting packages for missile strikes, artillery strikes, and, of course, air strikes as well. As now, the first of 4 air assault infantry companies was moving to their landing zone, which in effect was the west of downtown Dallas. They, aboard their transport helicopter company, equipped with 15 Z-20 utility helicopters, were being brought in. And now, they, being the first to arrive, would see heavy combat against armed reactionary civilians on the west side of the downtown. As in this particular image, it features a squad on the Trinity River Greenbelt Park, effectively a floodplain for the Trinity River, but it was also doubled as a park, and this squad-level NCO is controlling their ISR quadcopter asset and also monitoring in real time the real-time AI battlefield data processing system, and therefore able to, through radio headsets, communicate with all the members of the squad and guide them on what to fire and where to fire. As in this particular image, a man-portable HJ-08 anti-tank missile system is being fired at enemy personnel in the distance. Behind these hills is the highway that runs between the Greenbelt Park area and the Reunion Tower area, which is right here, as the Reunion Tower was very close to the Amtrak railway station, which was just beyond a number of tracks for local trains and also longer distance trains. The massive Dallas Convention Center was also in this particular area as well, as the police headquarters for Dallas would effectively be raided by PLA troops, as the PLA forces, as it came to downtown, again, would be landed in a diamond-like formation. They would be landed on the west side of downtown, another would be landed in the south of downtown, and another in the north, with the last being moved in to the east. And this particular company of the battalion landing in the east would assist directly with fighting the elements of the 2nd of the 198th operating in this particular area, as the armored forces would show up a bit later, as in an hour and a half into the invasion. The air assault troops would be heavily assisted not only by loitering munitions, but also by their own attack helo gunships of their combat aviation company within their battalion, as these Z-10 attack helo gunships were among the best in the world and were highly advanced and capable of massive, devastating firepower, as they could fire a different array of various types of ATGMs, as well as 70mm rocket pods, which could also be exchanged for larger rockets, and also their 25mm chain gun, which was enormously destructive. As the troops would be landed at first in their diamond pattern on the western side of the downtown area, they would be landed into the Trinity River Greenbelt Park on the other side of the river from the downtown, as they would make moves to capture local objectives such as the county jail and county courts system, including even the old state jail that was across from the county jail of Dallas, as well as also then begin to sweep the area around the West End, as it was called, of downtown, for any types of enemy combatants, and thereby neutralize them and hold the area as the transport aviation company would effectively shuttle in the next air assault infantry company of the battalion. As the combat would be heavy in this area, the armed reactionary civilians would try, in effect, to put up the best fight they could, but they would effectively be no match for the exceedingly well-trained, better organized, and better prepared air assault infantry troops that would be combating them, as these forces wore body armor and also Kevlar helmets. They effectively were exceedingly well equipped, not only with their own standard issue rifles, the QBZ-95s, but also with their squad's light machine gun, the QBJ-201, as this had an exceedingly high rate of fire and was a devastating weapon against enemy personnel, as well as carrying in not only anti-tank weaponry, such as the man-portable HJ-08, which was a very highly capable anti-tank system, capable of enormous destruction, but also light anti-armor weapons, such as the massively ubiquitous Type 69, as this had anti-armor and anti-personnel fragmentation rounds and was devastating against enemy personnel, as these different weapons were also augmented by rifle barrel-mounted 35mm grenade tubes on some of the rifles of some of the troops that carried them. All of his firepower was exceedingly heavy and well organized, as the loitering munitions fired from all of the different battalions effectively in the area would be effectively utilized in this particular area to devastating effect. As we go to the map of the first landing operation on the west end of the downtown area, this was effectively West Dallas. This was the Trinity River Greenbelt Park. Oak Cliff is just to the south and effectively blends with West Dallas, as the mauve color coding for the rail lines indicate that it is civilian passenger rail, as opposed to the brown color coding, which indicates freight rail. This, effectively, were the local trains, as well as also the longer-ranged Amtrak trains, as the Amtrak station is literally just off the map right here. This is the Reunion Tower, and there are hotels and other buildings in this area, as this was Dealey Plaza, and the old courthouse is just off the map in Dealey Plaza. As here, this was the West End area of downtown, wherein there were a local train station and old brick buildings that were mostly restaurants and touristy type areas. The landing of the 1st Air Assault Infantry Company of the Air Assault Battalion would effectively run relatively smooth, as the platoons making up the Air Assault Infantry Company would all be landed into the area and begin to lay down enormous volumes of fire against the horribly prepared armed reactionary civilians, many of which had effectively no body armor. They had a wide array of different types of weaponry, many of them with simple pistols, as these armed reactionary civilians in the downtown area were exceedingly poorly prepared. They effectively were cut down rapidly by the wide array of different systems, including the attack helo gunships, which would pave the way ahead of the advancing air assault infantry troops with their enormous volume of firepower, as, again, the 25mm chain gun was enormously devastating against ground targets, as were the ATGMs that would be fired, as the AKD-21 equipped this particular company, the Combat Aviation Company of the attack helo gunships, at this particular time. Again, there was different types of ATGMs that could be equipped on these attack helo gunships, but the AKD-21 was the choice for this particular operation. And they also had their 70mm rocket pods, which they would save for emergency situations, as these, especially when fired as an entire company, could lay down enormous mass destruction on the targets below. As the attack helo gunships were a difficult target to engage for any ground personnel, especially with small arms, they could bob and weave, and they could effectively move up and down rapidly, making them an exceedingly difficult target to actually hit, as they were now sweeping the area ahead of the landings, as this platoon of the Transport Helo Company moving in with a platoon of air assault infantry troops of the entire air assault infantry company that was landing in their 3 combat platoons. This platoon would effectively land and take up positions along the edge of the Trinity River Greenbelt Park, as this was the I-30 bridge across the Trinity River, which connected to I-35, which was a north-south route and was the key invasion route that had to be secured at all costs, as the external invasion components would be utilizing this highway to effectively move north in their bid to effectively race deep inland in 48 hours or less, as it would actually take them just slightly less than 48 hours to reach their final destinations, as they were making excellent time. The Trojan shock forces were the main movers and shakers of the entire invasion, as they made it possible for their heavy-handed reinforcements through the 4th generation warfare doctrines, which were the external components, to effectively move in and not have to get off the highway to engage enemies, only to then return and continue moving, as that would waste time and resources. The Trojan shock forces secured all the key nodes along the major invasion route, allowing the external components to race deep inland, only having to stop for fuel and possible other logistical needs if required, such as maintenance or additional ammunition and more. As the armed reactionary civilians were effectively in panic mode at this time because it was very, very early in the invasion, they were effectively a element that had no centralized command and control. They had no leadership. They were horribly disorganized, and worst of all, they were horribly logistically prepared and could only use what they carried on their person, or in some cases in their vehicles, such as technicals, which effectively were SUVs or pickup trucks with armed men inside, as that fit the definition of what a technical is. As these vehicles were getting on the highway, as the junction of I-35 and I-30 effectively had a number of different ramps that connected the highways, as the southbound ramp went under this ramp, and of course this was the westbound ramp here from I-30, I-35, where they had their junction. The forces landing were now heavily engaged in combat, as they were clearing their landing zone with assistance, again, from loitering munitions such as the CH-901As. These particular loitering munitions equipped with fragmentation warheads to do massive damage to infantry and light vehicle targets, such as soft-skinned vehicles like civilian vehicles or even soft-skinned military vehicles. These fragmentation-equipped CH-901As were devastating on these types of forces, as well as the attack helo gunship-based firepower, which was effectively blasting vehicles and personnel throughout this entire area, as this was AKD-21 fire, and it was hitting a technical and personnel, as these personnel would end up surrendering, as the combat in this area was relatively heavy, despite the fact that the armed reactionary civilians were exceedingly poorly prepared. Long-range cruise missile strikes coming in from the DH-10As, fired by the reserve battalions that effectively bolstered the active duty brigades of the strategic missile forces, the 612th and 613th in Mexico, were now firing these systems to hit with heavy precision against their given targets, as these targets, such as these bivouac sites and hotels, were effectively collected by the cyber intelligence arm, analyzed by the AI system, and targeting packages were thus created, as again, the cyber warfare arm of the PLA could effectively hack into the different systems of the American regime prior to the invasion and find out where they were sending forces, whether it was effectively hotel rentals, whether it was property rentals, or otherwise, such as sending them to specific city parking lots and other areas. All of this intelligence was collected and processed through the AI real-time battlefield data processing system, and thus the targeting packages were already pre-prepared prior to this invasion. As these air assault troops landing in West Dallas on the other side of the Trinity River Greenbelt Park were now laying down heavy fire against the armed reactionary civilians that were on the other side of this Trinity River Greenbelt Park area and in it on its eastern side. J-10s, which were the fighter aircraft, which did come equipped with two 1,000-pound laser-guided or sometimes Baidu-guided precision munitions. These could be utilized for close air support. However, that would not be necessary, as the combination of the attack helo gunships, the loitering munitions, and the ground troops effectively had this entire operation well under control. As the county jail and court systems, as there were court buildings in the county jail and court in this area, and the old state jail building were a coveted objective, as they wanted these places to effectively use them as POW centers. The platoon landing in the middle of the three landing zones, as one platoon would land in the south, one in the center, and one in the north. The center platoon would effectively advance across the street bridges in this particular area to begin to clear the county jail building, as according to building clearance procedures, there would be squads waiting outside while others would effectively enter the building and capture it intact and, again, utilize it for their own purposes. As this, again, was only the initial landing operation, as these troops cleared the area and laid down supporting fire to assist the platoon crossing into this area. This other platoon would effectively bound and cover tactically across the Trinity River in this particular area and effectively provide support in the north for the county jail and court capture operations, as the attack helo gunships would also move ahead and effectively clear enemy forces from the area. Precision artillery strikes were allowed in this particular area through the howitzer strikes, as the 152mm PLL 66 Battalion that was tasked with providing some fire support to this area had several of its firing batteries committed to the fighting in the downtown area, as it was comprised of 7 firing batteries total and a headquarters and support battery. 3 batteries were committed to the downtown combat. Also, there were 2 batteries of the PLL-01 battalion committed to this area that were effectively being utilized to assist in the downtown combat operation as well, as the 300mm battalion, out of the grouping of the 3 battalions of the 19th Artillery Brigade in this area adjacent to the National Grasslands, would not be firing so much in the downtown area. However, they would fire into Deep Ellum and raise some of that portion of the city to the ground, as the 300mm strikes were absolutely undeniably devastating to the point where all that would be left would be smoldering, rubbled ruins after a strike from these very potent artillery weapons, these rocket systems. As in the downtown area, as the county jail and courts in this area, including even beyond, as they would then move on and clear the other buildings in the area after securing this landing zone area, the attack helo gunships, along with precision artillery strikes, would do an absolutely devastating operation to clear the area ahead of the advance of the ground troops, the air assault troops, as the AKD-21s targeting the technicals, along with the 25mm chain gun fire, as well as even the possibility of the use of the 70mm rocket pods, which would be conserved until the right moment, would be absolutely shattering to the American forces of the armed reactionary civilians. As they would continue to plow the area ahead, more would effectively be cut down by the heavy firepower from these gunships. As they could fire well beyond this area, there were a number of buildings blocking the view, causing them to have to effectively move up to be able to see better into the downtown, as they would continue to plow all enemy forces that were out in the open, effectively making it impossible for enemy personnel to effectively move safely from building to building, as they would be spotted and effectively cut down by a combination of the attack helo gunship fire, loitering munition strikes, or even the possibility of artillery fire if and whenever sanctioned, as it was all ISR directed and precision oriented in the case of this downtown combat. As the highways were also being cleared, as again, I-35 itself was a major invasion route, and this was I-35E, and this was the most important objective of all for the air assault forces in the area of the 1st Company landing of the Air Assault Battalion tasked with securing downtown Dallas. As again, the county jail, court systems, the state jail building, and control of the highway were of the absolute utmost critical importance for the PLA forces in the area, as all of these enemy personnel would be swept aside brutally by the attack helo gunships, while the ground troops laying down heavy supporting fire for the crossing of this battalion would effectively, along with attack helo gunships, cut these forces down, as the enemy personnel on the I-30 bridge would also be destroyed by the combination of ground-based fire from these two squads on the southernmost end of the landing, as well as also attack helo gunship fire with their chain gun. As all of this was enormously destructive, the capabilities brought to bear by the 83rd Air Assault Brigade were absolutely immense and added enormous capability to the already exceedingly well-equipped 59th PLA Group Army, as the arrival of these forces absolutely shattered any possibility of any coherent defenses being established in the downtown, as this was in effect a situation that occurred in other occurring battles that were going on concurrently, as Waco and Oklahoma City would effectively have their downtown areas effectively having defenses set up, as they would have time to do so. However, with the air assault troops, this was quite frankly impossible and could not be done, because the air assault forces absolutely shattered any hope of setting up defenses, as they were highly mobile and could be inserted into any area within this battle space in an exceedingly rapid amount of time. As again, this was the Reunion Tower. This hotel was absolutely destroyed by 152mm artillery strikes. The train station and the convention center were effectively just off of this map in this particular area, as it can be seen on this particular animation, the I-30 bridge crossing, as well as also the Amtrak station, Reunion Tower, and the massive Dallas Convention Center off in the distance, as this was a very short encounter with the PLA vis-a-vis the armed reactionary civilians. The PLA forces were quasi-elite air assault infantry troops, and they had really no issues effectively putting down all resistance in this particular sector. However, as more of their air assault infantry companies would be inserted into the downtown, as the transport helicopter company within the battalion would be shuttling these troops in, they would encounter more heavily armed forces, as the effectively heavy 2nd of the 198th albeit losing all their communications and ISR capabilities, would still pose a threat as their weaponry that equipped these forces was exceedingly heavy. As the M1 Abrams tank was no slouch, it was a very effective main battle tank, although it was highly vulnerable to the weaponry that was being utilized by the PLA, including all the way down to their man-portable HJ-08 systems, although the attack helo gunships were an outstanding piece of equipment to utilize against main battle tanks, as the ATGMs carried the 25mm chain gun, which could shred up IFVs and APCs, as well as also the 70mm rockets, would absolutely annihilate these types of ground-based forces, as they effectively shuttled their air assault infantry troops into the downtown area. This very heavily armed combat aviation company within the air assault battalion would provide a very effective force for covering their air assault infantry troops on the ground as they were being landed. As they would clear buildings, as they would be landed on top, they had options to effectively breach the building through either the staircases that led to the roof access or repelling, as these troops were experts at repelling, as they could repel and either shoot out the windows or kick them in to breach the building. And these troops, indeed, of these air assault forces, as one company, would be landed in the south of the downtown area to effectively neutralize and capture the Dallas PD headquarters as well as the City Hall. These forces, again, would meticulously and methodically clear these buildings in their various tactical formations tailored according to the building layouts, which again they would receive information upon from the real-time AI battlefield data processing system, as it processed all intel in real time, including everything from the battlefield layout of the terrain to building layouts of the interior, from both open source and hacked intelligence. As the combat in this area, as depicted, effectively involved the tossing of a hand grenade into this room, this large office room, before the troops entered and realized it was a massive room, and therefore tailored their tactical formations accordingly, with these troops laying down suppressing fire, while these two troops would move around, and then they would begin to bound and cover together across this massive office room. As in smaller rooms, the stack team would breach with 4 men going in, each taking a corner, yelling clear, with the 5th man effectively standing outside to guard their 6 o'clock, before the troops, after clearing a room, would rejoin into a stack team and continue moving down the hall, room to room, as was being done here. And there would have been another stack team, which effectively was an entire 10-man squad broken down into 2 5-man half squads or stack teams. They would go room to room on their side of the hallway and clear these rooms with a high degree of tactical precision, as again they would move up and down the stairwells as the elevators no longer worked due to the grid down situation that kicked off the invasion. As the air assault troops by 1:30 a.m. would be receiving a massive reinforcement from the Armored Battalion from the 16th Infantry Division. These heavy reinforcements, combined with these quasi-elite air assault infantry troops, would be absolutely devastating against the defending forces, as it were, as they would not only surround the confused and disoriented 2nd of the 198th, as again they lacked any communications, they lacked all ISR capabilities as well, and thus would not even realize they were even being surrounded by the PLA forces, as the Armored Battalion would again, with its maneuver companies, its 4 tank and 2 armored infantry companies, break up into 3 companies moving directly through downtown like so, and the other 3 effectively swinging around into Deep Ellum to cut off the 2nd of the 198th, and a large grouping of armed reactionary civilians, including a group of over 200 that fled as soon as the shell and rocket artillery from the grouping of battalions of the 19th began to come in from the 19th Artillery Brigade. Again, PLL 66 Battalion, PHL 03 Battalion of the heaviest systems, the rocket-based artillery systems 300mm, and the PLL 01 155mm Battalion of towed howitzers. They would all lay down enormous firepower throughout the city and effectively pummel it into absolute ruins. As the downtown was now beginning to be secured by the PLA forces, the western side would effectively be captured in approximately 45 minutes. As again, this was a very rapid but very brutal encounter between armed reactionary civilians and the PLA forces that annihilated them with the combination of loitering munitions with fragmentation warheads, the attack helo gunships with their immense degree of firepower, and the ground-based troops and their well-formed and very aggressive tactics, as these troops were a very, very effective fighting force, and they were very tactically astute with their small unit tactics, and thus working together would be able to lay down an immense degree of well-coordinated, well-guided firepower as prescribed by the real-time AI battlefield data processing system, which was connected to the ISR network. As again, the squad sergeant monitoring his PDA form of his combat data link, which also acted as a transponder for the real-time AI battlefield data processing system to plot their current positions on the map. Anytime they moved, the real-time AI battlefield data processing system would effectively plot their position in real time. This, in effect, was not only the case with vehicles, but also with the troops based on their squad NCO's position, which effectively calculated the rough position of the entire squad within the real-time AI battlefield data processing system as a result. And now, as they laid down immense firepower on the poorly prepared armed reactionary civilians, more air assault infantry companies would be brought in and begin to continue landing in their diamond pattern. Again, this was all according to the objectives as well as the layout of the downtown of Dallas, as opposed to the objectives and layout of the downtown of Fort Worth, which was occurring slightly different in terms of the tactics being utilized. As here, they, landing in their diamond formations, would effectively capture all the key areas within downtown Dallas in a rapid manner, as well as be able to hold open the route for the arrival of the armored battalion from the 16th Infantry Division, moving in effectively to assist in engaging and destroying the 2nd of the 198th. That was the priority of this armored battalion upon them completing their flank clearance operations against small clusters of armed reactionary civilians en route to the downtown area, as they would in effect be crossing using the I-30 bridge as it could support their heavy armor, as well as then splitting up into their various companies and moving through and around downtown to surround the eastern end of downtown, wherein the 2nd of the 198th was bivouacked, and again was in a state of massive confusion, and the forces of the 2nd of the 198th would commit one of their tank companies to conduct a reconnaissance operation in the north by the Clyde Warren Park, where effectively they would be checked and destroyed by a PLA tank company sent to effectively stop them from effectively trying to escape the downtown in an effort to recon the area to then report back to their battalion's leadership. As the fighting would ensue. The ebb and flow of combat in this particular area would be undeniably devastating, as the edges of the downtown on its eastern end, including Deep Ellum, would be pummeled into total destruction. As the battle continues in the downtown area, the next video will highlight the operations in both the north and the south of the downtown area, as the Transport Aviation Company would be rapidly bringing in the rest of the air assault infantry companies into this particular area, with heavy support coming from their attack helo gunships